Hello, everyone, once again from the capitalist dystopia of the United Kingdom. And today, yes, we are talking about capitalism, mainly about how capitalism is ruining football, but more specifically, how Saudi Arabia, through capitalism, are ruining football. Now, capitalism and football is something that doesn't really go together. Most sports and capitalism don't really go together. I think the American version of sports is like one of the worst versions just because it's all about franchises. It's all about the brand. And most of these sports teams don't spring out of local communities. And then you see them like be completely moved from like one state to another based on the whim of the owners or the board members and stuff like that. But in European sport, specifically football, a lot of football teams have sprung up out of working class communities. I used to play for a semi-pro team, which started as a bunch of scientists who got together, made a football team like 100 and something years ago. And that pretty much is the history of football in the United Kingdom. It's local communities, it's even unions, it's members of workplaces getting together and creating football teams like over 100 years ago. And then we have the modern forms today. But over that time, capitalism has been eroding the sport. And it is really bad in places like the UK, for example. Germany has a better model than us in that corporations and billionaires don't completely run their football teams. But who knows, maybe we'll get there one day with Germany as well. And in the UK recently, the monument to Arab Gulf money basically buying up UK sports was two things. It was Manchester City finally winning the Champions League, but also winning a historic treble. And it's also Newcastle United being bought by the Saudi investment fund, which essentially means it's been bought by the Saudi state. And they even had an away kit last year, which was in the colours of Saudi Arabia. And that's where we're at now, because the government won't regulate this because we're run by a bunch of billionaires anyway. We're run by the richest prime minister of all time. So are they really going to stop this? And Saudi Arabia are deep in bed with most Western governments. And of course, the history of Saudi Arabia influencing the West can't be separated with its relationship with the United States, going back all the way to the 1930s with US oil companies helping them explore Saudi Arabia for oil, up until 1919 with Operation Desert Shield, where US soldiers were literally sent to Saudi Arabia to protect oil fields from Saddam Hussein, to the modern times, especially with the Trump era as well, and how close the Saudi investment fund actually are with Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. In the UK, specifically, finance is really influenced by Gulf Arab monarchies as well. It's fair to say the immediate future in the West is dominated by money coming out of the Gulf from oil. But why Saudi Arabia are taking such an interest now in sport is a couple reasons. Sports washing, they realize they don't have a great image in the West because of their human rights abuses. So buying up football teams and getting very famous football players to come to Saudi Arabia helps clean up their image, but also their oil isn't going to last forever, so they are diversifying. And that is kind of the point of the Saudi investment fund. It's to put the money Saudi Arabia have made from their massive oil sales and put it into new things where they can continue to dominate for the future, which includes a time where the world won't rely as much on oil, or there isn't as much oil in Saudi Arabia to sell on the global market. But like I said, in a lot of European countries, there's no regulations about this money, even coming from another country's government. Another country's government can buy a sports team. A lot of the fans won't even care because it makes them competitive in the league. And that's where we're at now with capitalism ruining football. Is you basically have to choose, who do you want to own you? Do you want American billionaires who view it all as like an American franchise and don't really care about trophies or success? They care about stability and profits. Do you want to be owned by someone linked to a Gulf Arab monarchy, probably from a country that has terrible human rights abuses, but they'll pump so much money into your club? And in the case of Man City, actually run your club pretty well, and it seems Newcastle is going in a similar direction. Or do you want some dodgy guy who will use your club for money laundering or tax avoidance? Or do you want, like my club, Brentford, someone who made their money in gambling? We have a lot of choices in this. And I guess the only thing I will say is I think the Saudi stuff takes it even a step further, because as much as I hate billionaires, having a fund which is headed by Mohammed bin Salman buying up sports teams is a little bit different than your average American billionaire or British billionaire or whatever buying a sports team, because they're not directly tied to a nation state. So I want to talk about all of this today, and sometimes I just have to treat myself. I love football. I want to talk about football. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about football. I understand for a lot of you, you won't really care because you don't like sports, you don't like football, whatever. But also, I would say maybe stick around, because it's not just about football. It's about the Saudi government. It's about the Saudi investment fund. And it's about how close they are with Western countries. Now, in terms of my own relationship with football, I made a whole video about the Qatar World Cup being like the fire festival of football. And you guys will probably know if you've watched that. I love football. I play football. At the moment, I'm doing pre-season for a Sunday league team. I used to play like a decent level, like semi-pro level in like 2019, 2020. Had some bad injuries, so gave that up. And me and my friends, we've won a lot in the five-a-side league we play in. We don't do that anymore, sadly. But going back, I've always played it, literally since I was about 5 years old. And I've always been an athletic person. But the only sport I was ever actually good at, you would actually say like I'm good at it, not just like passable, is football. And like I said, Brentford have always been my local team, been going since I was 5 years old, have a season ticket there. You know, absolutely, you know, have loved going and seeing their rise. My family support Man United, so I kind of support both of them, which you're not really meant to do. But Brentford were always in like League 2 and League 1. Man United were in the Premier League, so that's how I rationalise it, basically. And I'm not really going to stop. I don't really care what people think. But yeah, I love football. I watch it all the time. Italian league, French league, Spanish league, whatever's basically on, I'll try and watch it. World Cup was great, you know, absolutely amazing final. And yeah, love playing football games, love even Rocket League. So this is something I'm really passionate about, and it's pretty much the soccer subreddit is a subreddit I spend the most time in all the time. Like, yeah, really love football. So that's why I am passionate about this and want to talk about this a bit more. Now, I've spoke a bit about the English game, and I want to talk about the global game. So Saudi Arabia have been on a spending spree recently, but people are saying it resembles the Chinese spending spree of like 8 years ago. If you guys don't know, Xi Jinping basically wanted China to qualify for another World Cup and potentially host one in the future. But China isn't good at football, despite having a massive population, just like India. But there is an appetite for football in China. So with help from the state, they incentivize various businessmen to invest in football clubs. But what actually happened was a bit of a disaster. They would all buy very expensive players on very high wages, but these players would come over basically for a paycheck, and a lot of them wouldn't really try, and it didn't really seem to help the game at all. There wasn't a lot of interest in other countries in watching the Chinese league compared to like the Korean league, the Japanese league, and other Asian leagues, which have a more organic following. It just seemed like there wasn't much passion, and then lots of teams have gone completely bust because of things like corruption, embezzlement. So it was a bit of a disaster. But Saudi Arabia seems like it's going to be different. And why that might be the case is Saudi Arabia, as a footballing nation, aren't actually bad. China are bad, especially compared to its population size. Saudi Arabia are good. And they're one of the better Asian teams as well. They've won the Asian Cup a couple times. They've qualified for multiple World Cups. And probably the crowning achievement was they beat Argentina, the eventual World Cup winners, in their first game of the tournament. And they played an amazing game. Great to watch. Loads of talent on display. And I said in my video about the World Cup, I don't mind countries hosting the World Cup despite their terrible governments or whatever, because it's the people's game, right? We have no say on our governments, but everyone loves football. And in that, I don't think people should be deprived of seeing something like the World Cup in their home nation if there's an appetite for it. Qatar does not have this footballing culture. There was not an appetite for it. But Saudi Arabia does. And like I said, Saudi Arabia have good football players. Saudi Arabia has a good national team. And this is why I'm mad about this on another level as well. This spending spree the Saudis have done is going to kneecap their own national team. Because the Saudis were looking good, and it looked like they could improve if they put the money into the domestic league and focused on improving domestic players rather than spunking millions and millions on foreign players, some of them washed up, some of them pretty good, then they develop as a nation further. But what they're doing this for is they also want to host the 2030 World Cup with Greece and Egypt, so they feel like they have to put all this money into an image thing rather than the quality of their national team, which I think is a mistake. So if you guys are wondering, basically 4 clubs with a majority ownership by the Saudi state have been buying up very, very good players. And unlike in a lot of these cases, China, MLS, a lot of these players, nearly every single team in the world would happily buy if they could, right? Some of these players are absolute quality. And I'm going to go through a list of the most prominent transfers, and we're going to just talk about them. So obviously last January, Cristiano Ronaldo signed for Al Nassr, a Saudi team partly owned by the Saudi Investment Fund, and lots of people had a new interest in the Saudi league. His team didn't win the league, which was quite funny. But yeah, lots of people took an interest, and he claims he wanted to promote like Arab football, Saudi football. But Odion Igalo, who also used to play for Man United, he said everyone coming there is basically doing it for the bag, which we're going to talk about a bit later. But in the summer, these Saudi teams have gone on a massive spending spree. So this one was a shock, but at least he's older. So Karim Benzema to Al Ittihad on a free transfer. Obviously, he's a current Ballon d'Or holder for being absolutely amazing for Real Madrid recently. And his contract was worth 400 million euros over 2 years. And of course, it's in Saudi Arabia, so paying pretty much no tax on that as well. And then you had N'Golo Kante, Chelsea to Al Ittihad as well. 86 million euros per year throughout his 4-year deal with the Jeddah-based club, which is crazy money. Like N'Golo Kante, one of the great midfielders of the last, 6-7 years. Injuries have really derailed his career, so probably not worth that much anymore, but still a lot of people would take him. And this one was probably the most depressing. Ruben Neves to Al Hilal, only 26 years old. They paid 55 million euros for him. Ruben Neves basically walks into most midfields in the world right now, right? Not like a top midfielder, wouldn't displace like every single person, but I'm pretty sure nearly every top team would at least be happy to have him on the bench. He would start for a lot of top teams as well. Only 26, and he's going to Saudi Arabia, right? And that's why it's depressing, because this money is even turning the heads of people who could play for any club. And it just shows the amount of power this has, is that you can basically get anyone to sign for you, really, if you throw enough money at them. Going on even further, Koulibaly from Chelsea, who had a dreadful season last year, but I don't know if there's any shady things going on, but Chelsea hit the jackpot, basically sending all their dead wood to Saudi Arabia, but he signed for Al Hilal as well. Edouard Mendy, who was a Chelsea goalie again, had a pretty terrible season. He signed for £16 million. Steven Gerrard, Liverpool legend, not a great coach. He signed for El Ettifaq as the manager. Another depressing one, Marcelo Brozovic went to Al Nassr as well with Cristiano Ronaldo. 3-year deal with a salary of 25 million euros a year. His last competitive game in Europe was the Champions League final. Again, another player like Ruben Neves, who walks into most teams in the world. The only thing is he's a bit older. He's 30 years old, but still a sad thing to see. Robert Firmino, obviously Liverpool legend at this point, to Al Ahly as a free agent. Another depressing one, Milinkovic-Savic to Al Hilal as well, 28 years old, 20 million euros a year. And again, another top midfielder. Wouldn't say he's as good as the other ones, but he still gets into most top clubs, I would say, at least as a bench option. Seko Fofana, who had a great season with Lens last year, only 28 as well, and he's gone to Al Nassr as well, so that's sad to see. Alex Telles, basically the biggest journeyman in football, so not a massive loss, but went to Al Nassr as well. Malcolm from Zenit to Al Hilal, which again is whatever. Obviously, the biggest hypocrite here is Jordan Henderson, Liverpool captain, going to Al Ettifaq with Gerrard for £12 million. Allegedly, he's earning like £700,000 a week there. Moussa Dembele from Lyon to Al Ettifaq as well. Riyad Mahrez from Manchester City to Al Ahly. 32-year-old treble winner with City last season. Alan San-Maximan from Newcastle to Al Ali as well, 26 years old. Again, a very depressing one. Firmino from Liverpool to Al Ittihad, 29 years old, still could do a lot, great midfield player. Sadio Mane from Bayern, one of the best players in the world over the last 5 years. Terrible season last year with Bayern, so he's gone too. And if you see how they match up, and you have these teams, and again, these are great players. I'm showing you, nearly every player that's been signed is a world-class player in some respect. And to prove this even further, they did a Major League Soccer All-Star 11 versus a Saudi Pro League All-Star 11. And the Major League Soccer one is basically foreign players, I think. Basically, former top players who play in the MLS. So you have, I wouldn't put Hernandez as a striker if I'm doing an all-star MLS team with the best players. But you have some decent players there. But it's nothing compared to the Saudi team. You've got Ronaldo, Benzema, and Firmino up front. Mane, Kante, Brozovic, and Mahrez in midfield. And Telles, Koulibaly, Fabinho in defence with Mendy in goal, right? That is a top team. Of course, the positioning is a bit weird, but those players on paper, most of them walk into most of the top 20 clubs in Europe. And now they all play in Saudi Arabia. And just a bit on these clubs I've been mentioning, Saudi Arabian government announced that its sovereign wealth fund had acquired a 75% stake in 4 of the league's 18 teams, Al Hilal and Al Nassr in Riyadh, and Al Ali and Al Ittihad in Jeddah. The public investment fund is coordinating the acquisition of players based in Europe, of whom it aims to place at least 3 at each of these clubs. And then even recently, there's been links between Neymar and Al Hilal as well. So like I said, a lot of those players are top players. They should not be spending their best years in Saudi Arabia. And why I say that is because all of these players were paid very handsomely where they used to be as well, right? Because some people might make the argument, it's, they need this money. Nearly all of those players were very wealthy. And okay, people like Benzema coming towards the end of his career, Ronaldo, I don't care as much really. Benzema said because he's a Muslim, it's nice to go to Saudi Arabia because that's where some of the most holy sites in Islam are. A lot of those players are actually Muslim, and they've said that as reasons. But like Igalo was saying, yeah, they come for the bag, right? The money is insane, tax-free, getting 20 million at least a year. Some of them getting insane amounts to play football at a lower level for a couple years. And what a lot of them probably see it as I'm going to go for 2 years, get a shit ton of money, then I'm going to go back to Europe, because a lot of them could probably still have a good career back in Europe. Like Ruben Neves is 26. That's younger than me, right? He could play there for a couple years, make loads of money, go back to Wolves, go back, go to Barcelona, go to whatever. And sometimes you can go to these clubs and not lose it. So Paulinho, I remember, was a player who went to China, but then he came back and he was really good for Barcelona, right? So players are always going to be good. But I guess if you take yourself out of that environment, maybe you'll decline a tiny bit. And a small caveat as well, a couple of those players I mentioned, I think 3 of them are all from Senegal. And all of them, from what I've read, do a lot of charity work back home in their own villages as well. And even some of them have said, I've gone there for money, and it's so I can put more money back in my old village, right? Which, is fair enough, right? Like, if these people grow up very poor, come from very poor African countries, they're taking this Saudi blood money and putting it back into their communities, that's a good thing. But a lot of them have no excuse. And probably chief among them is Liverpool former captain Jordan Henderson, who has spoke up about LGBT rights in the past. And he was also the captain of Liverpool, one of the most socialist football clubs in Europe. And a lot of them feel very betrayed because he's essentially sold out the LGBT community. And he was already being paid £200,000 a week. Think about that for a second. Think about your life if every single week you were getting £200,000, right? But for these people, it's not enough. And I've seen arguments saying, generational wealth. He wants generational wealth. If he wanted that, he could just, buy mansions for his family or something and then sort them out. Like, there's so much stuff he could do with his money, which is probably still unethical, but not going to become part of the Saudi sports washing project. It's probably not surprising that most people in life will have their heads turned. But it is just crazy to me, someone from England who does have this reputation for being a good force, for change and for speaking up for marginalised communities, would destroy it all, right? Because when you become that wealthy, he's already very wealthy, he's 33, he's played for Liverpool for over 10 years. 200k a week he was on. Think of all that money he has. At that level, what's the difference between 200k and 700k? You can't even spend that all. Like, what are you going to do with that? I don't understand. And in the long term, you're just going to taint your whole career. You had an amazing career with Liverpool, won them the first Prem in like 30 years, Champions League, all that good stuff, and he's ruined it. Like, people are always going to say, oh, remember when he went to Saudi Arabia? And again, I don't understand this greed. I'm sure there are other places he could have gone which would have paid him a lot of money too. Outside of England, maybe America, places like that. But no, Saudi Arabia has to be. And honestly, I just hope he's miserable playing there, because he's not even playing for one of the Saudi state-owned clubs, I don't think. And I've been reading that a lot of these players are in for a bit of a shock, because the infrastructure and comfort levels in Saudi Arabia in terms of football aren't anywhere near the Prem. So we'll see how that goes. But maybe it's worth it to him for 700,000 a week, which is just absolutely baffling amounts of money. And before we move on to the Saudi investment fund and the project of just why Saudi Arabia is doing this, I want to talk about the sporting thing quick again, because a lot of people have been saying, oh, why do Saudis get deprived of the best players? Like, why should they? Like, you're a hypocrite. And this is the problem, right? And it's my problem with Manchester City. A lot of clubs who have success and brand recognition in the past are the best clubs. And they're the best clubs because they play the best football. In the past, that made them more wealthy because they were the best. But you still had room for upsets. You still had room for your Blackburns to win the league. You still had room for, I don't know, your Nottingham Forest to win the Champions League. Your Man United in the past, in the 60s, to win the Champions League. And then you have, obviously, more recently, an absolute fairy tale like Leicester winning the 2016 Premier League. And it feels like with this consolidation of this Arab money in football, that stuff just will not happen anymore. The way PSG dominates the French league with their Arab Gulf backers, that's going to be the Premier League. And it is becoming the Premier League. Man City are basically winning every single year. And they won the treble. And the problem is, Manchester City as a club in England were pretty irrelevant. Yes, they've won the league a couple times historically, but pretty much growing up, no one supported Manchester City. They were irrelevant. They were even in the lower divisions when I've been alive, right? And now they're one of the biggest clubs on the planet, one of the best clubs on the planet. And credit to Pep Guardiola and all the players. But fair enough, you're playing great football. But they have so many allegations of breaking all the rules. And they've obviously just come out of obscurity because they've been bought by very rich people. And it's a project by very rich people. And that's my problem, is that it's not organic. And then what you're going to have now is less organic things as well, like the Saudi League, where people are going to watch this just for this kind of circus of all these greedy players going there in stadiums that don't have big capacities and stuff like that, and just watching them play for money. The passion is gone, and that's the main thing. I play football, obviously, as someone who doesn't do it for a job. I play it for love, and I understand why people love it. I love it for reasons that have nothing to do with money, and I feel like money taints a lot of the reasons why I do love it. And just having a terrible, authoritarian, human rights abusing monarchy being able to dictate the world sport, being able to just come in and say, I'm going to buy up everything because I can't be bothered to develop an organic culture anymore. I'm just going to buy loads of foreign players, is depressing, and it's what's wrong with football. The same way with Man City back in the day, just buying up random superstars when they started off, and then obviously buying better players as they went on. And Newcastle are doing this as well now. A team that were recently in the Championship, although to be fair to them, are more relevant than Man City ever were. And anyone not concerned by the shift of state actors becoming deeply entrenched in European football is just insane. This is different. And as much as American money ruined sport in the UK as well, coming from the 1990s and TV rights deals, this is something that is even worse, because you're having these people who basically bribe everyone, deeply in bed with our own government, getting to choose what teams will be successful. So it's Newcastle now, right? Random team they picked, obviously for a variety of factors, probably because of the history. Newcastle's a big club. And now Newcastle are going to be successful. And now teams that were competing with Newcastle in the league, they can't compete now. And also what's going to happen is the Premier League is just going to become insanely wealthy. And when clubs go down to the Championship, as this sometimes happens already, it's more likely they're going to go bankrupt as well. So I think it's going to be a terrible knock-on effect. And The government is so behind on this. There is no regulation. So yes, the Saudi government can just buy sports teams. Qatari government, if they want, buy sports teams. Any government buy sports teams. And the way it's been normalized is funny because I'm pretty sure if a Chinese investment fund buying stuff for the Chinese government bought Newcastle, there'd be a lot of regulation. But when it's the Saudis, I guess it's fine because they bribe all our politicians anyway and we're so in bed with them. But now I've been talking a lot about this Saudi investment fund. What is this? What am I talking about? What am I talking about? This massive fund, which is an arm of the Saudi state. So play the game. I don't even know what this site is, but it was a good article talking about this. So sport is a key pillar of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. In spring 2016, Saudi Arabia's then Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, now Crown Prince and newly elected Prime Minister, launched Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030, a roadmap and an ambitious plan that represents a comprehensive reform process of the kingdom's economic, political, and social structures. The vision covers a lot of projects ranging from a focus on climate change, tourism projects, the creation of a $500 billion futuristic megacity, NEOM, over various programs, and initiatives aimed at promoting the country's culture abroad and the application of its heritage. Vision 2030 is, of course, a part of the Saudi Arabia's wish to attract investors and make political alliances, and the regime is well aware of the need to transform its economic structure in order to reduce its dependence on oil revenue. One of the active engines behind Vision 2030 is the Kingdom's Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Public Investment Fund, with Mohammed bin Salman as chairman. In the PFI's program, one of their initiatives is to diversify and enrich the kingdom's tourism and entertainment experience to build a more vibrant society and solidify the sports sector's economic and social role on all levels. Therefore, PFI plays a significant role in Saudi Arabia's sports strategy, not least through various sponsorships in golf, especially LIV Golf, motorsport, and of course the ownership of Newcastle United. Fan Wikipedia had a good summary of just how, entrenched it is in so many things around the world. So let's have a look at this. So the PIF has a 38% stake in POSCO Engineering and Construction, a 5% stake in Uber for 3.5 billion, a 5% stake in video game companies Capcom and Nexon. In March 2016, it was announced that the ownership of Saudi Aramco would be transferred to the PIF, and the kingdom would seek to list 5% of Aramco's shares by 2017. In 2020, PIF purchased minority stakes in major US companies including Boeing, Facebook, and Citigroup. PIF disclosed a $700 million stake in Boeing, a $500 million one in Citigroup, a $500 million one in Facebook, and about a $500 million stake in Disney, and a $480 million stake in the Bank of America. PIF also disclosed an $800 million stake in oil company BP. In 2020, PIF purchased a 2.32% stake in India's Jio Platforms. 2021, they purchased stakes in the American video game companies EA, Take-Two, and Activision. In May 2022, they purchased a 5% stake in Nintendo, and the following month, an 8% stake in the Embracer Group. In 2021, PIF invested $2 billion into a private equity firm that has been newly formed by Jared Kushner. By April 2022, Kushner's equity firm primarily depended on Saudi money. On the 14th of April 2020, it emerged that a deal to transfer ownership of Newcastle for £300 million had been agreed between owner Mike Ashley and a prospective buying consortium consisting of the Public Investment Fund, PCP Capital Partners, and Reuben Brothers. And just an interesting thing to note about how this deal got done, in April 2021, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly asked Prime Minister Boris Johnson to intervene so the Premier League would approve PIF's takeover of Newcastle. Bin Salman threatened that there would be economic consequences for the UK if the government blocked the takeover. These threats occurred in the context of a strategic partnership between the Saudis and the UK, where the Saudis proposed to invest $30 billion into the UK economy over a 10-year period. That was a bit of a long one for you, but I just wanted to drive home the point. How much money they're throwing around? These numbers are insane, aren't they? I'm just saying, oh, 800 million, 800 million, 800 million, 1 billion, 1 billion. It's just like insane, right? And this is directed by basically the leader of Saudi Arabia to buy up influence. And what makes me laugh so much is there's so much fear mongering about China, Chinese companies. Can you imagine if this Saudi investment fund was actually a Chinese investment fund and buying up just whole sports teams in the UK and then just threatening the UK government if they don't approve it, right? Imagine if that was Xi Jinping directing that. Like, it's absolutely crazy to me, like, how no one cares about this. Like, we just accept it as normal. Like a foreign dictatorship just buying up massive influence in our country and threatening the government if I don't let them buy a sports team. And honestly, it's going to work. Like the Qatar World Cup was great propaganda for Gulf Arab monarchies. And if the Saudis get a World Cup, it's basically over. Like all these players are complicit in helping to whitewash this regime. But also, I'm not naive to think like, oh, the Saudis are like some evil that exists on their own, just out there doing terrible things. Saudi Arabia has been propped up historically by the UK and the United States, defended by both of them from countries like Iraq. I have no illusions that it's a symbiotic relationship rather than the Saudis like scarily buying up everything because they can, but it can reach that level. They are one of the richest countries in the world who have so much disposable money as well. And they're not, accountable to their citizens either, basically paying them off by not making them pay basically any tax. And why I'm saying like capitalism and the Saudis are ruining sport is it's just so cynical, isn't it, right? Like I said, Saudi Arabia have a good footballing culture. Saudi Arabia have good football players. Saudi Arabia's national team have been successful. So why not put money into that? Because it's not going to give you as big a return on investment. It's way more worth it buying Ronaldo, buying Benzema, buying Kante, buying Neves for your state-owned football teams instead, buying Newcastle. That's worth it more because you want to make as much money as possible and sports wash your reputation, maybe for some nationalistic reasons, but ultimately it also is for capitalism and to make your country wealthier and to make all these Saudi corporations wealthier. And I think it's probably like the best example of state capitalism out there. Like literally this massive investment fund is run by the head of the state. Is run by the head of the state who's also an autocratic monarch as well. It's like something from the 1700s in Europe or something like that. And so much in football is being ruined by capitalism. But like I said, why I hate this in particular is they're so wealthy, they can decide who's successful and who's not because they have those finances to just turn the heads of any player they want, really. Come to Saudi Arabia, like some of the best talent in the world, because we're going to give you so much money. Or UK government, let me just buy a whole football team. And then I'm going to make it successful by pumping it full of money. And their success isn't earned as much. Like, yes, pumping a club full of money doesn't ensure success. But at the same time, taking irrelevant clubs like Manchester City and making them the best in the world through breaking all the rules, bribing people and money is just so against the spirit of the game, which, we know we don't live in a meritocracy, but football in theory is meant to be meritocracy. As an individual, you earn the right to play. And as an individual, you earn your spot in a team. As a club, you earn your spot in the league, you earn your titles and stuff like that. But now it feels like it's just pointless, right? England is becoming France. We're just going to be dominated by Man City forever because they have the finances. So there's so much problems of rich people owning football clubs. But I think, like I said, I think this is more sinister because it is a nation state using these football clubs as propaganda and literally just like bending the world of football to their will as well. Because unlike other countries, you cannot divorce the Saudi state from the Saudi league. You can divorce the UK government from the Premier League easy. You can divorce governments from many leagues around the world. You cannot do that at Saudi Arabia. So in essence, you are complicit in what they're doing, in their sports washing of their brutal crimes, their brutal war in Yemen, all the terrible things they've done because you want to earn 700k a week rather than 200k. So yeah, the future of football is pretty bleak. So many problems outside the Saudis, but through capitalism and through this investment fund, they are just ruining the sport. And it takes the billionaire owner model we've been seeing since the 1990s, and which has been destroying the game as well, takes it to the next level. Not only are clubs now run by billionaire owners, they're run by billionaire heads of state from other countries who can come in and buy whatever they want and just do whatever they want with clubs that mean so much to local communities and which spring out of local communities. And that's the difference with American sport. British clubs are so in bed with their local communities. And like I grew up around Brentford, And when you're younger, you play against Brentford Academy teams, you see offshoots of them, you see the summer camps they run, and they're so a part of the community. And the thought that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia can come and buy the club and just do whatever he wants with it is just honestly like a pretty terrible thing, to be honest. Now, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.